We're going to look at this introduction. He says we have a sugya now for a week of Reb Chanina Sgan HaKohanim, and the first rule he gives us based on a pasuk in Bamidbar. It says, "Vani hinei nasati l'chas mishmeres trumosai," that we have to guard the truma and make sure it doesn't become tameh. Now, Erev Pesach, we have to destroy chametz. So let's say you have truma that's chametz, and obviously there's no way out. You have to burn the truma because it's chametz. However, based on the pasuk mishmeres trumotzai, it should be prohibited to be metameh the truma. Meaning, even though it's chametz and it's about to become asur and we're about to destroy it, but nevertheless we cannot be metameh. It's certainly not actively. But yet, the truma here, since it's going to be destroyed, it's omeid l'sreifa. So perhaps this mitzvah, this requirement, this mandate of mishmeres trumotzai doesn't apply. And therefore, you could take truma tahora, that's chametz, and burn it together with truma tmeya, that's chametz, even though by putting them all together, inevitably the truma tmeya is going to be metame the truma tahora. And this is going to be a machlokus between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, and it all depends upon whether you can accept an equation to the case of basar kodshim or shemen shel truma. When it's already tameh, can you increase or intensify the level of tuma? Or shall we say, since it's already tameh, this basar kodshim or shemen shel truma, there's no longer a requirement of mishmeres trumosai. So now he speaks about tuma. He says, tuma is ritual contamination, and it can have effect on adam v'kelim, ochlin umashkin. And he says there's a bit of a philosophy here that it comes from organic bodies like dead animals or dead humans, live humans, he says, who experience certain bodily irregularities. I guess it's anything that's aesthetically repulsive. You know, something that's like degenerating or decomposing. Now, he says the source of tumah is called avatuma, and he gives examples of nevela, the carcass of an animal that died without shechita, a dead sheretz, one of the 8 species of creeping creatures listed in Vayikra Perek Yud Aleph, a zav, a zavha, nida, mitzora, and a yoledis. Now, if any of the above, which is an avatuma, comes in contact with either a person or utensils or food or drink, so that is considered an avatuma. I'm sorry, so that which comes in contact with an avatuma becomes a rishon l'tuma. In the case of a mess, of a dead human body, a corpse, it's aviavos hatuma, so that if a person has a maga with a mess, he becomes an avatuma. Amongst this whole list of cases that are avatuma, the vela, sheretz, etc., we now have to add a person that touched a mess, because he now becomes an avatum. The mess itself is aviavos hatum. Does he say anything about a cheret? Or we'll see the note. Maybe he'll mention cheret, because there's a special status of a kli that is metal, and it gets the status of the mess itself, or whatever it comes in contact with that has tumousness. But let's just see what he has in the footnote here. He says that if you look at the beginning of Masechta Kelim and the Rambam's introduction to Seder Taras, you'll see a list enumerated of various forms of avatuma. And the phrase avatuma doesn't come from the Torah itself. It's a creation of the Rabbanon. They coined that phrase. And the phrase avatuma indicates that the level or the degree of tuma is such that it has the capacity to convey tuma even to Adam v'kelim. But I think what he's trying to imply here is that when you get to lower levels of tuma, then they cannot convey tuma to Adam v'kelim. Only an avatuma can convey tuma to Adam v'kelim. As far as Ochlin Umashkin is concerned, he doesn't address that question, but let's work with the premise right now that even something less than an avatuma can be mitame Ochlin v'kelim. So a Rishon could make a Sheni and a Sheni make a Shlishi. He says the capacity is generally reserved for things that are the source of their own tumah. Okay, so maybe he's going to get to cherev, because cherev is not a source of its own tumah, yet it has the status of an avatum, even perhaps an aviyavos tumah. He says that the category of an avatum includes anything that has the capacity to contaminate Adam v'kelim, even if its tumah is derived from a different source. So far, he doesn't give you an example of that. But he's saying that you could have an avatuma that is not deriving its tumah from itself, but rather from an external source, and yet it could contaminate and convey tumah to Adam v'kelim. Then he says the following: the source of the rule that a person or an article that's Adam v'kelim that touches a corpse is in the category of an avatuma. Here's his example. You could have something that's mitame Adam v'kelim, and yet it's not its own source. It was makabel tum for something else, and that's a tomei mes, meaning someone who came in contact with a corpse. He could be mitame Adam v'kelim because the corpse is an aviyavos tumah and the Adam is an avatum. So he could be mitame Adam v'kelim even though he's not an original source of his tumah. Then he says the pasuk states that one who's contaminated by a corpse conveys tumah to Adam v'kelim, and therefore he has the same status as a sheretz, meaning he's an avatumah. And just like a sheretz can be mitame Adam v'kelim, so too someone who came in contact with a mess could be mitame Adam v'kelim. Someone who comes in contact with a sheretz, on the other hand, is only a rishon l'tumah, and he cannot contaminate Adam v'kelim. But he can. This is important. If let's say Ruvain touches a sheretz, a dead sheretz, one of the 8 categories of shrotzim, then he becomes a rishon l'tumah, and he could be mitame ochlin umashkin. He cannot be mitame Adam v'kelim, but he can be mitame ochlin umashkin. He tells you to look this up in Vayikra Yud Aleph. But if you come in contact with a mess, with a corpse, you become an avatum. You can be mitame Adam v'kelim, not just ochlin umashkin. Now, something that doesn't have the capacity to be mitame Adam v'kelim is a vlada tumah. He calls it derived tumah. Even if in the chain of tumah transmission, it would be on the level of an Av. Okay, so this I don't understand. Let's see the example. He says, let's say he's got Ochlin Tmeim, which cannot be Metame Ochlin Umashkin. Oh, and even if an article of food touches a corpse, it is not classified as an Avatoma. So a human being that touches a corpse is an Avatoma, but not Ochlin Umashkin. Now, what about Kalim? Then I think it depends on what kind of keli it is. He says, however, with regard to contaminating other food stuff, the article that touched the corpse is like an av, or it's metame ochlin, and the ochlin becomes a rishon l'tuma. He doesn't spell out exactly what the case is. All right. Oh, now he gets to klei cheres. Klei cheres, earthenware vessels, can never contaminate people or utensils. It cannot be metame other v'kelim. And therefore, klei cheres is not an avatum. If a klei cheres touches a corpse, then it turns anything that it touches into a rishon l'tum. Now, other v'kelim and mashkim are makabel tumah without any machshir, but ochlin are not makabel tumah unless they first came in contact with a machshir. There are 7 machshirim, liquids, that when they wet a solid food substance, they are machshir that solid food to be makabel tumah. Okay, so let's go back to the paragraph here, the transmission of tumah. Tumah can be communicated. It's transmitted by contact from a primary source to a recipient, whether it's an Adam or Kalim, which now can transmit the tumah further. Upon transmission, however, the tumah generally becomes weakened and it gets a lower darga of tumah. So therefore, Rishon L'Tumah creates a Sheni L'Tumah, which is otherwise known as a Vlada Tumah. And then a Vlada Tumah, a Sheni L'Tumah, can create a Vlada Tumah, which is a Shlishi L'Tumah. And a Shlishi would only be Truma. And a Shlishi can create a Revi, but only with regard to Kach. So that's what he says in the next paragraph. There are 4 categories of things that are mit tameh, that become tameh. There's Adam, Kalim, Ochlin, Umashki. According to the Daraisa law, the first 2 categories, Adam and Kalim, can contract tumah only from an Ava tumah, or an Aviavosa tumah, meaning the mess itself. They can become tameh only in the degree of Av or Rishon, but no lower. Only foods and beverages can become a Sheni, Shlishi, or even a Revi L'Tumah. Now, with respect to Ochlin and Mashkim, so only Truma can become a Shlishi, and only Hegdesh, Kodesh can become a Revi. Now he gives a sort of philosophical statement. He says, the holier a thing is, the more sensitive it is to tumah. Okay, that's only true with regard to ochlin umashkin. So, for example, chulin can only reach the level of a sheni l'tumah. It cannot become a shlishi l'tumah. Truma has a higher level of kedusha and is more sanctified than chulin, and it can become a shlishi l'tumah. And Kodesh, which means Basar Kodshim, that has the highest level of Tumah amongst Ochlin and Mashkin, and that can reach the level of a Revi B'Tumah. There's no such thing as a Chamishi B'Tumah. Okay, fine. Now, he has note number 4. Let's go back to the previous page for a moment. He says that Ochlin, that Adam v'kelim umashkim, oh, that we saw already. And then he says that Ochlin have to be wetted, is that Tumah does not affect an unfinished object. Wow, that's interesting. I never knew that the reason why Ochlin needs Hechsher is because it's considered an unfinished object. A classic example is a metal vessel. It's shaped, fit for use, but yet the craftsman has not fully fashioned it into its completed form. It hasn't reached its makabeh patish, right, its final stage, and therefore such a metal vessel, and apparently even though it's functional, is not makabel tumah. He says if the design has not yet been engraved on it, for example, that's his example, or it has not yet been sanded down, it cannot be makabel tumah. With respect to Ochlin, external moisture is like the makabeh patish. Food that never became wet is not regarded as finished food, and therefore cannot become tameh. So he has a Rashi here in Chulin. This I don't. This is very new to me. Maybe it means that dry food is like raw, natural food. It's like growing in the ground almost.
Right.
It's interesting to think halacha l'maisa about taking fruits and washing them before we eat.
Right.
We take the fruit in our bare hands. And yadayim is shnios l'tumah. And once you put water on top of the fruits and you have to wash it out, then the fruits themselves contract tumah through the principle of yadayim.
Right.
But that doesn't have to bother us because it's chulin anyway. But back in the day, there were those who were very careful about chulin, and they treated chulin almost as if they were kodshim to avoid being mitame chulin. They were ochlei tumah, ochlei chulin b'tara. Now, I don't know if any people fit that category today. I wouldn't be surprised if there are people who are still ochlei chulin b'tara. They would have to dry. They'd have to dry off the fruit without touching it. I don't know. You'd have to be very, very careful about such a thing. Now he says the following. As a general rule, the title Tomei is applied to an object that can convey its tumah to another object. But there are cases where an object cannot convey its tumah. Like, for example, a truma that became a shlishi l'tumah cannot convey tumah and create a revi l'tumah. Or a kodesh, basa kodshim, cannot create a chamishi l'tumah. And in these cases, the terminology is pasul, not tameh. Again, they are tameh, but we prefer the word pasul because that indicates they cannot convey tumah. And there's a whole sugya about mashkim. I don't know. Let's see if he mentions that. He has a paragraph here in the bottom in the note called definition of mashkim. The Rambam in Perek Aleph Milchus Tumas Ochlin has a list of 7 liquids that are defined and categorized as mashkin. Oh, now what does that mean? So first of all, it means that they're machshirin. So if you have an ochlin that came in contact with any of these 7 mashkim, they are mukhshal l'kabel tumah. But he also says it's relevant to define these 7 liquids as mashkin with regard to being susceptible to tumah themselves, which is very interesting. In the next paragraph, he says that there's machlokas tanoim about whether mashkim are makabel tumah according to the Torah law, or it's only gzeira derabbanan. But even if you hold that the tumah of mashkim is doraisa, I'm not sure. I think there's another issue, if I remember correctly, that whether mashkim could be metame and pass on and convey tumah. All right, he mentions the 7 mashkim: water, wine, beers, bees, honey, olive oil, milk, dew, and blood. Okay, fine. Now, tame means, okay, so we said pasul, difference between pasul and tame. Now we have tara. Persons and utensils can generally be purified by tvila b'mikvah. An exception is the case of a person or utensil contaminated by a corpse. He needs hazah, and he also needs, obviously, mechatos. An earthenware vessel, that's clay cheres, cannot be purified of its tumah. You have to break it, right? And you have to, it has to say kli cheres yishaver. Okay. Now, after tvila, the person or the kli is tar respect to chulin. However, although he's allowed to eat ma'aser sheni, as far as truma is concerned, he needs what's called heriv shemesh. So let's say he goes to the mikvah an hour before sunset. During that hour, he's not allowed to eat truma. And he's in a state which is called tvul yom. And certainly he can't eat kodesh. And the tvul yom creates a shlishi l'tumah. That itself is a pella. Tvul yom should be an avatum. I don't know. He creates a shlishi l'tumah. A person who becomes tameh as a result of a specific irregularities of zava mitzora or yoledes must bring in a carbon. Oh, that's called mechusa kapara. And until he brings his carbon, the day after his tefillah, he is enjoined from eating kodesh, and he's not allowed to go into the mikdash. He has a footnote here. Number 8, the rules of a Tfil Yom and Mechusa Kippurim are doraisa, derived from Yoledes. And the Torah says that even after the Yoledes goes to be Toveles, she's Toveles, she still is not allowed to touch Truma or Kodesh. She's not allowed to enter into the Beis HaMikdash, even though she's after the mikvah. So there's a shirayim of Tumah. He calls it a vestige of Tumah, and that vestige of Tumah can be mitame, Truma, or Kodesh. And all this extends even beyond Tvila until the point of Kapara, when she brings the carbon. Okay, now he goes through some of the laws of Yoledes. The consequence of Tumah, the practical difference between Tumah and Tara is with regard to sacred matters only. So a Tameh, for example, a person who's Tameh, an object that's Tameh, is not permitted to enter into the confines of the Mikdash. Exactly what that means is that the Azara, well, that's actually a Gemara at the end of Eruvin discusses different areas of the Mikdash. Anyway, consecrated foods such as ma'aser sheni, truma, and kodesh all have to be protected from tumah. That's what we spoke about mishmeres trumosai. If they do contract tumah, they become pasul and they have to be burned. Chulin, on the other hand, is tameh, but it's not forbidden for ordinary use. Tameh food may be eaten. He mentions ochle tumah, ochle chulin v'tara. And a tameh object, now we're up to kalim, may be utilized for profane purposes. The significance of tumah in the case of chulin, or in the case of a kli, is only that they can act as carriers to impart that tumah to Kodesh, and that they're not allowed to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash. Now he distinguishes between different kinds of sacred objects. Kodesh, that's Tameh, is Asur Bana, and you burn it in a way that you produce no benefit. On the other hand, Truma Tmeya, you benefit from the warmth or the light or the fire, the heat of the Truma Tmeya as it's being burned. And this is based on a pasuk, Vani hinei nosati l'chas mishmeres trumosai. And trumosai is in Lashon Rabim, 2 trumos, implying that even Truma Tmeya is given to the Kohanim and they can benefit from it. But you have to see this drush. Okay, so now we can start the Mishnah. Rabbi Chanina Sgan HaKohanim, he says here in the note, now I'm using the Mesifta, that the Sgan of the Kohen Gadol was appointed such that if the Kohen Gadol becomes Pasul, then the Sgan would be Mishamish Tachto. So that was Rabbi Chanina's position. He was appointed as Sgan Kohanim, and he testifies that Miyameim Shel Kohanim, in other words, it always was that the Kohanim would burn even Basar Karbonos Shenitmu, and as we said before, Kachim Shenitmu, it's a mitzvah to burn them. Vayikra Zayin, it says, Vabasar Sheyiga B'chol Tameh Lo Yigdash Ba'eshi Sarev. And Lo Nimnu, they weren't inhibited about burning Basar Shenitma. Now, how did this Basar become Tameh? It touched a Vlada Tumah. And it seems like it touched a Rishon Tumah. Vlada Tumah is usually a Rishon Tumah. So this Basar is now a Sheni Tumah. And you're allowed to burn it with Basar Shenitma Ba'avad Tumah, which means a Rishon Tumah. So you have something that is a Sheni Tumah, and you're burning it together with a Rishon Tumah. Afal Pishem Osifim Tumal Tumasa. Because while you're burning it, they touch each other. Now, we have a Tumah Chamura here of a Rishon L'Tumah and a relative Tumah Kal of a Sheni L'Tumah. And there's no hesitation in burning them together, even in a way that they touch each other. Now, obviously, we have to try to figure this out. The Gemara is going to talk about this, I guess. Nothing is lost over here, because if the Rishon L'Tumah comes in contact with the Sheni L'Tumah, so what does that mean? It becomes a Sheni L'Tumah. It already is a Sheni L'Tumah. So a Sheni L'Tumah, remains a Sheni L'Tumah. It hasn't changed its status. Hosif Rabbi Akiva v'Yomar, Miyameim Shel Kohanim. And now we're talking about Truma Tmeya. Truma Tmeya, of course, you're not allowed to eat, but you have a mitzvah to burn it. But as we said before, the Kohanim are allowed to benefit from the burning of the Truma Tmeya while it's burning. For example, you could use shemen that was Truma Tmeya, that is Truma Tmeya, and you could use it as fuel to light your candle, Hadlakas Haner, and you could benefit from it as it's burning. Now here, he tells you in the note that there's a Rashi in Masechet Shabbos Daf Chaf Hey that seems to indicate that mitzvah sreifasa hidrabanan mishum she domel lekadshim. All right, that's a big chiddush. That the mitzvah sreifa is the rabbanon. We know it as a mitzvah doraisa, and you're allowed to be nene from the Truma Tmeya as it's being burnt. Lo nimnu milahadlik es hashemen shenipsal b'maga tful yom. So we said before, tful yom is before Hariv Shemesh, after Tefillah, and it has the status of a sheni l'tuma, and therefore shemen that comes in contact with the tful yom becomes a shlishi l'tuma. And we're going to pour this shemen that's a shlishi l'tuma into a ner. A ner is a kli shebo samim es hashemen, that's the receptacle. Shenitma b'tmei mes. So this ner came in contact with a tmei mes. A tmei mes, we said, is an avatuma. And the ner then becomes a rishon l'tuma, right? Because the ner came in contact with the tmei mes. And now you're putting shemen, which is a shlishi l'tuma, right? Because it contracted tuma by magav at tful yom. So tful yom makes a shlishi l'tuma. And now you're putting the shlishi l'tuma in direct contact with a ner, and that ner itself is a rishon l'tuma. So this is very understandable. That is a big chiddush. You're taking a shlishi l'tuma and you're making it into a sheni l'tuma. That I understand is a chiddush because you're intensifying the level of its tumah. But Rav Chanina Sgan HaKohanim, that I don't know. Let's just, for the fun of it, let's just jump ahead to the Gemara for a second. Then we'll come back to the end of the Mishnah.
Okay.
The Gemara asks, Michti basa shenitma bevlada tuma, my havi sheni. You took basar, and it came in contact with a vlada tuma, which is a sheni lutum. My havi sheni. Wait, just 1 second. The vlada tuma. Just 1 second. Basa shenitma bevlada tuma is a rishon l'tuma, and no, I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense. Let me try that again. What's the status, the Gemara is asking, of basa shenitma bevlada tuma? Right, that's Rav Chanina Sgan HaKohanim was talking about basa shenitma bevlada tuma. So if the vlada tuma, basa shenitma bevlada tuma, is a sheni l'tuma. Wait 1 second. I'm sorry, I just got myself confused here. Basar shenitma bevlada tuma. So the basar is noga berishon l'tuma. Now it becomes a sheni l'tuma. It becomes a sheni l'tuma. Basar shenitma. My havi sheni l'tuma. Just a second. Not sure I understand this Gemara. It's contaminated by a derived tumah. Is a sheni l'tuma. He says meat that was contaminated by a derived tumah is meat that touched a rishon l'tuma.
So that meat becomes a sheni l'tuma.
I see. So the word vlada tuma
Equals rishon
is a reference to a rishon l'tuma.
I think it's the same thing. No?
So you had basar that was nitma. Just 1 second. Basar that was nitma with vlada tuma. Vlada tuma is a rishon l'tuma. And that basar now becomes a sheni l'tuma. Now we have basar shin, right? Bahadi basar shenitma bi'av hatuma, which means it's a rishon l'tuma. Okay, good. So that's what we said. A rishon that comes in contact with a sheni l'tuma. So the Gemara asks, is my havi sheni. In other words, the basar shenitma bevladatum. If the vladatum is a rishon and the basar shenitma bevladatum is a sheni, then when you put it together with a rishon lutum, it ends up to be a sheni lutum. My havi sheni. It remains a sheni, but it is a sheni. Who sheni? Sheni who? Is my, what is this big deal about Rabbi Chanina Sgan that most of lo tumal tumoso, my ego, where's the Tosefis Tuma? It started at Sheni and remained at Sheni. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Chocha bevlad vlad askina. It means that we're talking about Basar Shenitma B'Sheni Lutuma, which became a Shlishi Lutuma, and now you're putting it in contact with a Rishon Lutuma. The Kasava Rabbi Chanina Sgan Kohanim, and this is the testimony of Rabbi Chanina, that Basar Shlishi Mutal Asos Sheni. Okay, that's a lot more to the point. So now the Gemara asks the following question: Veha ein ochel mitame ochlil. How can you tell me that the basar, when it comes in contact with basar, it takes a shlichi lutum and it makes it into a sheni lutum, but ochel is not mitame ochel? The sign we learned in the brisa, yochel ye ochel mitame ochel. Talmud Lomar, he says here in the parasha of Tumas Sheretz, it says v'chiyutan mayim al zara v'nafal minivlosam olav tamei hu tamei v'ein ose kayotzi bo tamei. So it means that an ochel can become tamei if it comes in contact with a sheretz, for example, but it cannot convey tumah. So how do we understand our Mishnah that basar together with basar is upgrading the tumah level from that of a shlishi up to a sheni, when we have a principle ein ochel mitami ochel? So the Gemara says, "Ha nicha le'abai diomar lo shanu ela b'chulin." We can answer this kasha according to Abaye, because Abaye holds that when it says that ein ochel mitami ochel, that's only b'chulin. But b'truva v'kodshim, ochel is osek kayotze bo. So ochel could be mitame ochel. Okay, he has a footnote here. He says, Makoro shalabayu midivrei Chagai hanovi. These are all sugyas that we'll get to probably. And Chagai hanovi says, Hein yisa ish basar kodesh beknaf bigdo, v'noga beknafo, el halechem v'el hanazid, v'el hayayin, v'el hashemen, v'el kol machol hayikodesh. And this is the way Chagai tested the Kohanim at the time by Sheni to see if they knew the halachas of Kodshim and Taras. And he asked them if an Adam sheyeshlo bebigdot sheretz, b'noga sheretz b'lechem, v'lechem noga b'nazid, which is some sort of cooked food, hanazid b'yayin, hayayin b'shemen. So you have a whole Chagadi over here. Ha'im nitma shemen shu revi l'tumah, which really depends upon whether it's truma or kodshim. Haresh alechem etamias hanazid hakodshim af sheshneim ochel. There was no question in Chagai's mind. It was implicit that certainly lechem can be mitami nazid. So that means that ochel is mitame ochel, and that's going to be the source for Abaye, that in the case of truma, ochel is mitame ochel. And the case of Chagai Hanavi is the case of truma. So hani chale Abaye diyomer lo shanu ela b'chulin aval b'truma v'kodshim is osek hayotze bo. That ochel could be mitame ochel in the case of truma and kodshim. And therefore, in our Mishnah and in the Edus of Rav Chanina Sgan, we're talking about Basar Kodesh. They came in contact with other Basar Kodesh. One was a Shlishi, one was a Rishon. So Ochel is Matami Ochel when it comes to Kodshim. That's according to Abai. He has both Truma and Kodshim in the list. Ula Rav Adav Rav Mishmei Derava Di Omer Lo Shanu Ela Bechulin Utruma Aval Bekodshim Otzel So Kayotze Behen. So according to Rav Ada, Ochel is Matami Ochel, but only in the case of Kodshim, not in the case of Truma. So Machlok Shin Abai and Rav Ada is with regard to Truma, whereas Abai holds that in this context, Truma is like Kodshim, and Ochel is Matame Truma, even if that Truma is Ochel. According to Rav Ada, Ochel is not Matame Truma, it's only Matame Kodshim. Shapi. So both according to Abai and according to Rav Ada, we can understand the Mishnah quite simply. And when you're burning Basar Shlishi with Basar Rishon, you're adding Tumal Tumaso, and we're talking about Basar Kodshim. Ela Ravina Mishmei Derav Diova Mikra Mole Dibra Kosov Loshna Chulin Biloshna Truma Loshna Kodshim Eino Ose Kayotze Bo Michael and Meimar. So Ravina holds that ain't ochel mitame ochel, period, without any exceptions. It's an absolute all-inclusive rule. It doesn't matter whether it's chulin or whether it's truma, whether it's kodshim. All of them are included in this rule that ain't ochel mitame ochel. So my ikala meimar. So if we go back let's go back for a moment to our introduction. And you remember that he had a paragraph here, definition of beverage.
Yeah.
And he said that beverages are relevant not only to be machshir, but also to be susceptible to tumah. And in the next paragraph, he writes, it's a matter of tanoic dispute whether beverages are susceptible to tumah biblically or only midrabanan. Let's say that beverages are susceptible to tumah on a doraisa level. So hachamay askinon the ika mashkin bahari basa. So even though ain't ochel mitame ochel, but mashkin could be mitame ochel. And on top of this basar, he's got some sort of liquid substance. And that liquid substance came in contact with an avatuma. The mashkin become a rishon l'tuma. And now he's burning it with basar. And he still has the mashkin olav. And these mashkin come in contact with basar that's a shlishi l'tuma that's being burned together with it. To come in tame, machmas ha-mashkin. Now the basar, which is a shlishi, will, through its contact with a rishon l'tuma, will become tameh on a higher level, meaning it becomes sheni l'tuma, and you're being mosif tumah al tumah. This is a brilliant chap, and the Gemara is saying that we can justify Rab Chanina Sgan HaKohanim even if we hold ein ochel mitame ochel, and we're going now according to Ravina, who says that ein ochel mitame ochel, period, straight across the board, kulin truma kodshim. But here's the case where there's mashkim on the ochel, and now if the mashkim became a rishon l'tumah, because this whole, conglomeration of ochel and mashke, bosa with mashkin on it, came in contact with an avatuma. So now the mashke become a rishon l'tumah, And therefore, when the basar, which is only a shlishi l'tuma, is burned together with this rishon l'tuma that has basar and it has mashkim on it, is it comes out to come mitame machmas hamashkim, that he's being mitame the basar that's a shlishi l'tuma as a result of the mashkin, and he's making it into a sheni l'tuma. And all this is because of the mashkin. So Gemara asks, "Hachi, well, how are you going to read this into the Mishnah?" The Mishnah says, "Lo nimnu milisrof es habasar shenitma bevlad hatuma im habasar shenitma bi'av hatuma." There's no mention, no whisper here of mashkim. Im habasar mashkim miboile. Somewhere along the line, the Mishnah should have told me that there were mashkim here, because that's the main point over here. That you're being mosif tumah to the basar and making it from a shlishi down to a sheni through the mashkim. Where is mashkim? I don't see any mention of mashkim. So the Gemara now seems to backtrack. The Gemara says, "Elanehi di'ena ochel mitame ochel b'doraisa midrabanan miu." However, ochel is mitame ochel midrabanan, and the Mishnah is telling me that you're allowed to burn basar shlishi together with basar rishon, even though ochel mitame ochel is only drabanan, but nevertheless, by burning them together, the being mitame, the basar which is shlishi, is now becoming a sheni. That's what we have over here. Just want to summarize 2 or 3 notes here. He writes that afal pisha benevuas chagai nemar sha'ochel mitame ochel b'kodshin. So for Ravina, how's Ravina going to reconcile himself with the pasuk in Chagai that ochel is mitame ochel? He had that whole chadgadya that we spoke about before, and he answers that Ravina holds the din zeh eina min haTorah el gozu chacham chia ochel mitame ochel. And that's going to be one of the Gemara's answers that we're going to have later on. And already at the time of Chagai Hanavi, that Gzera was instituted. And all this you'll see in Rashi, Dibra Maschil, Mikra. Now, the Makshan already knew that Ochel Mitame Ochel Midrabanan, but he didn't want to interpret our Mishnah as speaking about a Tosefes Tumah D'Rabbanan Bilvad. Now, let's mention Tosas Dibra Maschil De'ika, which you'll see is the third Tosas on the Daf. He quotes the Riva that Mashki Mitamim after Pachos Miravius. And this is very interesting because usually we say that you need a Revius Yayin or a Revius Lug in order to be the minimum amount of Mashkin to be Makabal Tumah. Harestam Mashkin Shal Gabi Basar Ein Behem Revius. How much Mashkin already is there on top of the Basar? Probably less than a Revius. Rabbeinu Tam, on the other hand, says, he argues that Min HaTorah Eina Mitam B'Pachos Miravius. There's no Tumah in Pachos Miravius, and it's all D'Rabbanan, and we're trying to learn this sugya on a Doraisa level. Rashi himself later on Daf Yud Zayin is of the same opinion. Tosas in Chulin on Daf Pei Zayin writes that Dafka Chulin Eina Mitamim Al Yidei Pachos Miravius Aval Truma Kodshim Nitmu Al Yidei Mashke Nitma'im Al Yidei Mashke Kol Shehu. And that's derived from a pasuk in Kodshim. It says Habasa Sheyiga Bechol Tameh. Now, according to Rabbeinu Tam Shita, you have to say that the Gemara thought in its kasha that in the light of Ravina's Shita, even the Rabbanan ain't ochel mitame ochel. Because if not, then what did the Gemara gain by giving the answer of Tosefes Tumah is al yidei mashke, if that Tumah is only midrabanan? And therefore, we're going to have to assume that according to Ravina, even midrabanan ain't ochel mitame ochel. And that's also indicated at the end of this Tosas Dibra Maschil De'ika. Now, Tosfos also mentions that according to the Havmin in Gemara, ochel eni mitami ochel klal, and therefore when the basa shlishi, which Rabbi Chanina allowed to burn it together with basa richon, is nitmal yidei eitzim ulevona shenitmu mi ochel rishon. Af she'eno ochel mikol makom, even though eitzim ulevona, those are piece of wood or spices or fragrances, is hey makablim tuma mishum chibas hakodesh. That's the separate chivas of kodshim, and machshivin also lios reuyim lekabel tuma. That gives the chashivas that it could be makabel tuma, even though they aren't ochli. And this is sugya later on in Daf Chaf. A lot of the sugyas are built one on top of the other. So you won't have another case of basa shlishi, because if it was no gea be ochlin, it's not nitma because ein ochel mitami ochlin. If it was no gea be mashkin, shenagu be ochel rishon, then it's a sheni, because there's a gzeres chacham and mashkin that they become a rishon, even if they were no gea and a sheni. However, Tosfos in Masechta Chagiga writes in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that eitzim ulevona einam adifim mi ochel gomor, the afhem einam mitamim ochel. Shrei kol tumasi mishum chibas hakodesh shemachshivo samli ochel, and it can't be better than ochel itself. And Rabbi Chanan is quoted here saying, I don't mean Rabbi Chanan the Balatosa, I mean Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. Shalachora divrei muchrachim shekain im dover hanitma mishum chibas hakodesh mitami ochlin, is then madua kol ochel shekodshim lo yitami ochel midin chibas hakodesh eno garua mietzim ulevona. Now again, we said that a tful yom has the din of a sheni l'tuma, and it can only convey tuma to truma and kodshim to make it into a shlishi, or in the case of kodshim, which can become even a revi l'tuma. And finally, there's one last note over here. The Gemara is going to say that Hosif Rabbi Akiva Meim Shel Kohanim Lo Nimnu Milahadlik Shemen Shenifsal Bitful Yom B'Ner Shenitma B'Tomi Mes is Michti Shemen Shenifsal Bitful Yom Ayavi Shlishi V'Chi Madlik Le, when he lights this Shemen Shel Truma, it's a Shlishi B'Toch Ner Shenitma B'Tomi Mes, which is, of course, a Rishon L'Tuma, is my Havi. What happened to the Shemen? It becomes a Sheni L'Tuma, is my Kamashmalon, Shlishi Mutal Asos Sheni Hayu Haf. You're in effect repeating that Chiddush that we already got from Rab Chanina Sgan Kohen. And he writes, Kusha Sagmar Einel Fishita Sabai V'Rav Adabar Ava, Hasovrim Shekodshim, with regard to Kodshim Ochel is Mitami Ochel Min HaTorah. L'shitas Ravina, Ein Ochel Mitami Ochel El Midrabanan, is then Vade Mosif Rabbi Akiva Al Divrei Rab Chanina Sgan Kohanim, Shemi Divrei Rab Chanina Lo Shamana Shemuta Lahosif El Tuma Dirabanan. Ve'ilu Rabbi Akiva Chiddush Shemuta Lahosif Gam Tuma De Oraisa. That's a big Chiddush of Rabbi Akiva above and beyond Rab Chanina Sgan Kohanim. So that according to Ravina, there's a clear-cut Chiddush in Rabbi Akiva, because Ein Ochel Mitami Ochel and only Midrabanan. But according to the case of Rabbi Akiva, we're not talking about Ochel be Mitami Ochel, we're talking about the Ner. And then we're talking about Tumah Doraisa. And Rabbi Akiva's Chiddush is that Mutar Lahosif Gam Tuma Doraisa. Okay, then. So this is where we're gonna stop for today, and we'll continue with Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mirz Hashem in the next meeting. Thank you so much. And we really have just given a little bit of an introduction to a very major sugya, which covers so much of the laws of Taros. So we're getting a really good picture and insight into the laws of Taros.